I was leaning in to light the last candle on my daughter's galaxy cake when my mother-in-law flattened both palms on the silver board and slid the whole thing into the running sink. Buttercream stars dissolving in the stream while the birthday song died in people's throats, and my little girl stood with her cheeks puffed, breath trapped behind 7 unlit wishes. 10 minutes earlier, someone had asked if I was the sitter, even though I was in my scrubs with frosting on my sleeve, because the place cards on the table said Evan and Lila, but not my name. And I laughed it off the way mothers do when we've learned to make ourselves small so the room stays calm. But in that split second, with sugar spiraling down the drain, I realized calm had cost us too much. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd consider subscribing to my channel, it would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sloane Carter, and the afternoon our house learned what silence really sounds like began in the soft clatter of our kitchen, with a metal bowl, a cloud of powdered sugar, and my daughter's careful hands tracing constellations on butcher paper that we taped along the dining room wall. I was still in my powder blue scrubs, hair tied back, wrists smelling faintly of hand sanitizer and vanilla, and Lila stood on a step stool passing me toothpicks like little wands, while I spun a sugar ring to sit over the small cookie planet we had set at the top of her galaxy cake. She wanted Saturn up close, she said, because the ring looked like it kept things in balance. And she smiled at me with frosting on her cheek that she refused to wipe so she could wear the night on her face a bit longer. Evan moved through the sliding door with the extension cord looped over his shoulder and asked which post I wanted for the paper lanterns. And I pointed to the ones least likely to tangle when a breeze came through. We had measured the backyard not for distance, but for feeling, adjusting the projector so the stars would land where the fence was highest, and the shadows would fall where the kids would play. Lila's place card sat drying near the sink, foil stars glued at each corner, names in the same blocky handwriting she uses for spelling tests. I added mine before washing a whisk and left it to dry on a paper towel. And a few minutes later, when I reached for it, the small card was gone. It was such a tiny thing, a missing rectangle among spoons and napkins, that I told myself not to make it bigger than it was. And kept going. Inside, the banner Lila had lettered the night before said Night Sky Birthday in marker that bled a little on the butcher paper, and she had asked me twice if we should make one for Grandma. 2. I told her the one on the table that said Grandma would be enough, and she nodded, as if she understood there are some names that carry more weight depending on where they sit. The doorbell always rings twice with Marcia, once polite and once like a reminder. And when I opened it, she was there in pressed slacks and a white blouse, eyes taking inventory the way some people read a menu. She brought no gift and carried a slim clipboard with a pen tucked in. And she looked past me to Lila and said, "Lily, you look ready," as if that had been her name all along. Lila's paper crown sat crooked on her head, and Marcia reached to straighten it with a firm, neat touch that could have been gentle, if not for the way it felt like something else was being adjusted. She greeted a mother arriving behind her and introduced me before I could speak as Evan's helper, the sitter. And when I said, "I'm her mom," the other woman blinked, smiled at me, and said she had seen me in the produce aisle yesterday, and had meant to ask how I manage hospital shifts and birthday cakes, calling me Nurse Carter with a warmth that landed like a small light in the doorway. Marcia talked past it, pleasant and composed, about how Evan teaches woodworking and how third graders do better when routines are firm. And I stepped aside to let them in, telling myself our home could hold this and still feel like ours. By the time everyone arrived, the yard had turned into our tiny planetarium. The projector threw a slow field of stars against the fence, and the paper lanterns caught the last of the afternoon sun. The kids ran loops around the long table, fingers trailing along chair backs, and the parents gravitated to the drinks like planets to a familiar pull, reading labels on lemonades they would have poured at their own kitchens. Lila stood on a chair to adjust the party favors stickers, pencils, folded paper rockets, and placed each bag with care because she believes nothing should be handed out without thought. Marcia settled herself in the corner seat with the best view of the door and the table, set the clipboard beside the lemonade, and smoothed the sheet I recognized as Lila's end-of-term report. The box for self-management said emerging, a word I like because it honors growth. And Marcia circled it in red and set the paper like a centerpiece, telling Willa's mom in a voice meant for rooms with microphones that candles are for excellence, not for noise. I lifted the galaxy cake gently from the counter to the console by the sliding door and adjusted the sugar ring so it hovered right where Lila had wanted it. And one of the dads whistled softly and asked if I did this kind of thing on the side. Only when she turns 7, I said, and Lila ran a finger through the air, tracing where she wanted the candles. You can put them around Saturn, she whispered, like the planet could hear. Evan dimmed the projector, and the yard softened into that particular light that makes a room ready to sing. We started too soon, as you do. Voices finding the notes even as someone fumbled for a lighter, and Lila closed her eyes early the way kids sometimes do, cheeks filling with breath she was saving to send 7 flames out at once. I leaned in with the last match burning down toward my fingers. And that is when Marcia pressed both palms flat on the silver cake board and slid the cake into the sink under the faucet, turning on the water as if rinsing plates at the end of a picnic. The buttercream stars loosened and bled blue and silver into the basin. The cookie planet cracked and slipped, and the sugar ring broke in two and caught briefly on the drain before the water covered it and blurred the ceiling lights into a wavering smear. The song thinned and stopped. 2 kids giggled the way children do when grown-ups act like they forgot how to be in a room, and the rest looked to their parents for a cue. Marcia said, clear and even, that there would be no candles for underperformance, and tapped the red circle on the report as if it were a stamp. My hand went for an oven mitt as if some part of me still believed I could rescue a cake from running water, and Lila's eyes found mine and held there. She did not cry. The room felt like it had been wrapped in something too tight, and she stood straighter, lifted her chin a fraction, and said, Grandma, I made something for you. She picked up her small tablet from the shelf by the window, holding it gently with both hands. People shift in a certain way when a room is deciding whether to keep its courage or go home, and I saw that small wave move through our guests. Marcia said she would watch if it was brief and appropriate, and she took the center of the couch without being asked. Evan clicked the television on and changed the input to the screen we use for baseball and storms, and Lila reached up to the remote, tiptoeing to connect her tablet, her glitter crown slipping slightly. The title she had drawn with a stylus filled the screen in careful letters, How to Spot a Helper Who Hurts, by Lila Carter. The room exhaled and held. The first clip came from the hallway outside the aftercare room at school. You could see the bulletin board with handprints outlined in crayon and a jar of sharpened pencils on a table. Marcia stood talking to another grandmother about how children thrive on structure and how she was helping Evan keep track of forms and pickups so that they could bring some consistency before 3rd grade. Adding that courts-like routine in a tone that made the other woman glance around. Lila had framed the shot at knee height, which told me she had recorded from the bench where kids wait with their backpacks. And in the reflection of the trophy case's glass, you could see Lila's sneakers swinging. The second clip was set in the waiting area of a nail salon, where Lila sat with a library book while Marcia spoke into her phone. Her voice was quiet but clear as she told someone she was recommending more overnights with Evan until Sloane's schedule settles, and that she was documenting small inconsistencies because professionals pay attention to patterns. And then she laughed in a way that did not belong in that sentence. The third clip showed our living room on a Saturday I had worked, the television black like a mirror. You could see Lila in the reflection coloring at the coffee table, while Marcia told Evan some households need leaner settings and suggested I be the parent who fills weekends with fun, while he carried the serious weight of weekdays. One of the moms lifted a hand to her mouth without covering anything, just leaving it there as if to steady herself. Evan shifted closer to the television, not to turn it off, but to stand with it. The next image was a photo from the Homeowners Association barbecue a few weeks earlier, a wide shot of neighbors in folding chairs, paper plates on laps, captioned online by someone else, Evan and Lila. I felt the slight nick of paper where that kind of absence cuts. And before the sting finished arriving, the video rolled again to show Marcia speaking with two neighbors near the grill, saying kids do not need parties for every little event, and that she was helping Lila's academics by encouraging a more disciplined schedule. A phrase that sounds generous until you hear it alongside a sink full of blue sugar water. Between clips, Lila had added simple title cards in her own words, pretending to help when you want to steer, saying structure when you mean control, saying concern when you were taking over. She kept each clip short enough to keep the room awake. There was a final scene recorded from our porch one evening. Marcia telling Evan not to worry how it would appear because people understand when a mom is overwhelmed. Her hand on his forearm, and his face in profile looked young and tired, and the sight of it sent a heat through my throat because I recognized that expression from nights when we slept in shifts and thought we were the only ones awake in the world. When the screen went still, the room stayed quiet a long beat. Marcia stood and placed her clipboard on the coffee table like a prop, calling the recordings an invasion and insisting that her words were about care, not custody, and that Lila's edits had made them look like something they were not. She reached toward the cord where it plugged into the wall. Evan stepped between her and the outlet, planting himself the way he does in the shop when he teaches a student to hold a board steady before the first cut, and said, "Mom, sit down." His voice was steady in a way I had not heard in our living room. She hesitated, then pulled her hand back, not because she agreed, but because something in him had changed. The mother with the jar of wildflowers spoke without heat or flourish. She said that words like more overnights and professionals pay attention to patterns sound careful until you remember a child is hearing them, and that introducing me as a sitter had confused her because she had spoken with me at the grocery store about night shifts and pancakes, and I was very clearly the mother who had made this night happen. Another parent nodded, added that kids deserve to be celebrated even when a report says emerging, because the word means exactly what a birthday means. Lila leaned into me, and I put my hand on her shoulder. Marcia said we had set her up to be humiliated and that we would regret it. And I told her we were not staging anything tonight, only letting the room hear what it had already absorbed. Evan opened the front door and stood there, not braced or angry, just there, and told her she needed to go, and that we would be changing the door codes before breakfast. She stepped forward like she might call his bluff, and then reached for the cord again out of habit. He caught her wrist and guided it back down, a gentle, firm motion that said a door can be closed without a slam. She walked out with her chin lifted, and when the door closed behind her, the paper lanterns on the patio stirred in the same breeze that had followed her in. Willa's mom said she kept a lemon bundt cake in her trunk for potlucks that went sideways, which was not the kind of sideways she had expected. But a child should have candles. We set the cake on the patio table, and I sifted powdered sugar over the top until it looked like thin snow on a small hill. We sang again, louder and lighter, and Lila blew out 7 little flames with both cheeks puffed like a swimmer coming up for air. She pressed a forkful of cake to my lips like a private ceremony. And when I laughed, the sugar dusted my shirt and she giggled like the kitchen had just told a joke. After the last guest left, and the house settled into the kind of mess that proves a day happened, Layla took her tablet and a notebook to her room and asked me to see what she wrote. Her letters leaned forward as if they were moving toward something, and she wrote that her party had 2 cakes and that the second one tasted like a different kind of happy because Daddy used his strong voice. She wrote that the first cake melted like the night sky, which was sad but also pretty, and that she felt like Saturn because the ring did not fall even though it looked like it might. I kissed the top of her head and told her balance is sometimes a choice you make with other people. In the kitchen, I ran warm water in a basin and watched the blue streaks at the bottom of the sink fade, a small, stubborn reminder of the galaxy that had run down our drain. Evan handed me a glass and apologized without performing a monologue, which was better than any speech, and said he would call a locksmith in the morning and email a boundary letter through the family attorney so that our next chapter did not start with a text war. We did not rehearse how to explain any of it to anyone, because we had already decided we owed no long stories to people who did not live here. The next afternoon, Layla's teacher asked to speak with me by the playground where the noise could hold our words without carrying them. She said Lila had shown her the title card and asked if she could share it in class for a lesson about truth and kindness. And the teacher had watched carefully and asked to keep the parts that taught noticing and leave out the faces. She said Lila's work was careful and not cruel, and suggested we help her turn that attention toward recording everyday kindness, so the habit did not become a hunt. We agreed, and that night we named a notebook the Kindness Lab and strung a line with clothespins down the hall. Lila clipped up pictures of small good things: a classmate zipping another kid's backpack, a neighbor dragging a trash bin up a steep driveway, Evan leaving a note in my lunch bag that made me smile during a long shift. A letter from Marcia's attorney arrived 2 days later, claiming intrusion into her privacy, and our reply was short and calm. We did not read it at dinner. We did not speak about it at the sink. Evan installed a new keypad lock on the back door, while Lila sat on a stool turning screws into a bowl, and he told her you can make a door harder to open for some people without locking yourself in. He started therapy on Thursdays at 4, met a counselor who used simple questions and long silences, and came home looking like a man who had learned a new way to stand. He said no to extra bus duty at school, and yes to the slow walk from the car where he reached for my hand, because sometimes you practice simple things on purpose. We stopped going to the Homeowners Association events, not with a statement, but with a quiet no. The mother who had brought flowers checked in with a text that said, simply, "Thinking of you three." Lila asked once whether she'd been mean to Grandma, and I told her she'd been brave, that telling the truth is not unkind even when it makes a room uncomfortable. She nodded and went back to coloring the Orion constellation for the hallway, taping the new sheet over faint gray squares where the old tape had rested, and the fresh paper held faster for having something underneath it. We changed the codes. We sent the letter. We made tea. We learned which chairs to leave empty and which names to put back where they belong. And when the people in our lives ask what we did next, we tell them we carried on in our small house under our paper stars. And the truth stayed said. A week later, I found my missing place card under a stack of coupons and rubber bands in the kitchen drawer we call the drawer, the small rectangle with my name smudged where the marker had brushed my thumb. I slid it into the Kindness Lab notebook and pressed it flat. Not because I needed the card on the table anymore, but because it felt right to keep proof that small erasures can be undone in quiet ways. On Saturday, we cleaned the yard, shook the dust from the lanterns, and left one chair at the end of the table with a card that still said, Grandma. We did not move it. We did not fill it. It told the truth. Months passed and the air warmed again. Layla asked to invite 3 friends to watch the new star setup Evan had built with a different projector that made the ceiling turn slowly like a dome. And I said yes, because the house felt like it could hold people without leaning. I baked a simple chocolate cake and let Leela spread the icing with a knife too big for her hand, standing behind her and guiding the blade when it wandered. When the kids sat down to eat, Lila looked at the empty chair with the card and asked if we should put it away. I told her we could leave it until it stopped saying anything, and she nodded like someone who understands that time itself has jobs in a house. Some days I open the drawer where the piping tips and ring molds live and let my fingers rest on them. Not to plan a cake, but to touch the tools that built a night and lived through it. I do not rehearse explanations for people who were not there. I do not offer a softer edit. We answer questions with small truths. Our home is quieter. Our boundaries are clear. Our child is growing in the light we have, instead of the shadow we used to live around. When I think about how the evening began, with the match in my fingers and the song half sung, I mostly see Lila standing with her shoulder against me while her own work spoke for her, and a room full of adults learning how to listen.